Szanowni Państwo, my będziemy nagrywać to spotkanie, a w zasadzie tylko jego pierwszą część, czyli część prezentacyjną. Włączyliśmy trochę wcześniej kamerę po to, żeby potem równo odciąć ten fragment, który będzie udostępniany. Karolina, powiedziałam, że nagrywamy prezentację. Po polsku powiedziałam.
Dziękuję bardzo. Okay. I think we can almost start now. It's 12 o'clock. The clock has chimed, so perhaps we can get going. I see that there are still a few more meetings open, but I think slowly but surely everyone will come onto this one. So first of all, welcome everyone. We're just going to go through a few organizational issues as people get from meeting to meeting. And first of all, I'd just like to say that today's meeting will be held in English, obviously now, but if you'd like to at any point write in the chat, you can do so, of course, in Polish or in English. And also during the discussion, you are very free to ask your questions in Polish or in English, and we'll just translate and revert them back to English for the discussion. Okay, and as my colleague Iwona has already done, thank you. The recording has started for this first part of the session, and we will stop the recording for the discussion part so everyone feels as free as possible to discuss at will. So it's 12:01. And I think this is a good a time as any to start today's session. So it is my great pleasure to welcome everyone here to actually the third session of the Didactic Digression series. My name is Karolina Czerska-Shaw, and also I have the great pleasure to have been a part of the educational ecosystem for this past year or so. And this is the team that came up with this idea for the Didactic Digression series. And as I mentioned before, this is the third in our series. The idea behind the series is to explore different aspects of academic teaching in these bite-sized mini doses. Seeing that we all have problems with time and crunching time. And in these bite-sized mini doses, we use the input of specialists in teaching and learning to stimulate discussion, reflection, and the development of our own academic teaching skills. So today we have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Aeddan Shaw, who is an employee at the Institute of English Philology at the Jagiellonian University. Academically, Aeddan works at the crossroads of philosophy and language. And, you know, where philosophy and language meet, and in his own words, he can often be found wandering their highways and byways, generally looking a little bit lost. He teaches courses on teaching methodology, linguistics, and history. He also delivers teacher training and mentoring courses at the JU Doctoral School of the Humanities, and has worked for Cambridge as a CELTA trainer, so it's an English teaching certificate trainer and assessor for the past 15 years. He is also part of the Mistrzowie Dydaktyki program, a flagship teacher training program supported by the Ministry of Science and Higher Education in Poland. And so now I just want to, as way of an introduction, I just want to take us back to actually 2 weeks ago when we hosted Professor Wojciech Glatz from the University of Gdańsk, who discussed with us how the brain learns. And the key takeaway that at least I had was that our brains and our students' brains need to be constantly motivated. Given the pandemic context of the last 18 months and switching between online and offline learning, this seems to be a great challenge. So today we have the pleasure of hosting Aeddan, who will talk and discuss with us the challenges and opportunities of this new context, together with some tips and hopefully helpful and practical methods to help us and our students stay motivated. This includes HiFlex, Light, Jigsaw, Flipsaw teaching, and COVID classroom management tips. And I think that is all for my introduction. Again, we warmly welcome everyone here. Aeddan, I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Carolina. So perhaps I'll just start with the presentation.
Sorry, guys. Could you wait for a while? Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
Sure.
Because there are another 30 people still participating in different meeting, so we need to move them to this one. So I will try to give them the link to our meeting. Okay, please.
Of
2
course.
minutes.
One
Sure.
thing that I didn't anticipate in terms of online teaching.
Sorry, it's probably my fault, my personal.
No, not at all, not at all.
Okay, well, this is, I mean, I suppose this is one of many challenges, I suppose, we have in just opening the door to, to meetings. When we're in the classroom, we open one door. When we're online, there are many doors we can open when we never know which one to choose. And perhaps this, sometimes being lost in the virtual space literally comes out very strongly here, doesn't it? So,
No właśnie, wiem, poczekaj, ja tylko usiłuję się zastanowić, jak ja mam ten link znaleźć. Wiesz, przepraszam cię bardzo, bo tutaj...
That's okay.
Czekaj, ja do Justyny zadzwonię.
Okay.
No, it's true. I mean, I have classes in room 103, and it's not that we have multiple room 103s in the same building. So long as my students know which room to go to, then they're generally okay.
I'm sure, as a digression, for the moment, this is one of the things that does come up sometimes, is the plurality of meetings that are started at the same time, and also students, when we have breakout rooms, students who get sometimes stuck in the ether between breakout rooms. I don't know if amongst, we have now 35 participants here. You may also share your anecdotes and your stories about being lost, literally in the in the ether, in these in between spaces, online. I'm sure we can gather many little anecdotes and stories of just being and having 3 windows or 10 windows open at the same time and not knowing which ones to go into. So perhaps this is again, these are just some of the challenges that we have even before we start. Before we enter into the classroom, how do we enter into it? And that's part of the challenge.
Karolina, ja bardzo będę cię prosiła o pomoc, bo mój komputer nie jest tak szybki, żebym mogła zajrzeć na tamte grupy. Przepraszam Państwa bardzo.
Nie ma sprawy.
Starałam się to zorganizować najlepiej, jak potrafiłam.
Nie ma sprawy, not a problem. I'm going to step out of this virtual room for a second. Aeddan, I'll give the floor to you just to open up the session here, and I'll be back. Okay.
Oh, okay. So maybe I'll go back to sharing my screen and the presentation. Just to kind of pick up on something that actually Professor Anna Sajdek-Burska mentioned a few weeks ago when she opened these meetings. And this was the idea that we've had, I think, for a long time, that traditional teaching is kind of boring, it's not very innovative, it's quite dull, and it happens in the classroom. Whereas innovative teaching is something that happens online. But as we can see from the situation today, online doesn't necessarily mean more effective. Again, if we were all together in one room, so long as everyone knows how to find their way around the university, we wouldn't have these kind of hitches and holdups. But I think also, and I'll go into this a little bit more in a bit more detail when we start with the actual presentation proper, but it's this idea that there's a dichotomy, that these two things are opposed, that traditional is always against innovative in some way, that in class is somehow against online. And I think one of my objectives for the session today is to maybe try to get rid of that dichotomy, to show that you can be just as innovative in a traditional classroom setting as you can using the latest technology, and that also that I think rather than looking at them as two different spheres, two different places where teaching and learning happens, we should really be looking at them as an integrated whole. And so hopefully I'll be able to kind of give you some tips and show you how, at least based on my experiences over the last semester, how I've been trying to kind of combine these two worlds. So.
Excuse me, is this the concept of blended learning then?
No. So, I mean, again, I'll get into this in a little bit more detail when we start the presentation proper, but it's primarily about an approach to kind of integrating online and offline classrooms using something called HyFlex. So HyFlex is a bit like it's a combination of hybrid learning, so where you can have face-to-face interactions, and you can also have online synchronous options, but you can also have a third option, which is asynchronous. Now, hybrid teaching, I mean, certainly in terms of how I've seen it implemented in my kids' school, essentially consists of, children come to school for a week, and the other half of the class is online, which to me seems a bit like the kind of worst of both worlds, in a sense that they don't necessarily, it's fairly arbitrary in terms of determining when they come to class, and when they don't, it's kind of on a based on your surname, and it doesn't necessarily help you to kind of integrate the two. They often tend to be taught in two different things. So the students who are in class are taught by the teacher, and the kids who are online are just given things to do to kind of keep them busy. What HyFlex does is it gives students a choice in terms of how they participate. And it also means that rather than kind of treating them as three separate learning experiences or three different lots of work, you treat it as an integrated whole.
Oh, that sounds very interesting.
Well, hopefully, we'll see. So.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but we have now hopefully 2 meetings coming into one. So Aeddan, if I can ask you just for 20-second introduction, and then you can continue, please. Thank you.
Sure. So a 20-second introduction from myself, or?
That's up to you.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Aeddan Shaw. I work for the Institute of English Philology at the Aeddan University. I'm a teacher, first and foremost. I'm also a teacher trainer for Cambridge. I work on their CELTA and Delta programs, which are methodology courses for, one is an initial teacher training program and the other is for more advanced and experienced teachers. And today I'd really like just to share some kind of ideas, some insights, and some tips for how to kind of cope with the kind of teaching that we're having to do at the moment. So as I said before to the first group who was here, I was partially inspired by Professor Anna Sajdek-Borska's presentation, which opened this whole series of meetings, because she raised the, I think, fairly crucial point, which is that we tend to look at teaching in kind of this kind of as a dichotomy. Yeah. So we have the traditional teaching, the kind of boring kind of fairly straightforward and not very dynamic teaching experiences tend to be in class. Whereas the kind of innovative, cutting edge, exciting stuff is what happens online. Yeah. Now, the feeling that I had when we kind of switched to teaching online was actually the opposite. I found myself doing things online that I would never do in a traditional classroom. I found myself kind of falling back more on traditional lecturing. It was very teacher-centered, and there wasn't really much engagement between students. And if you think about the dark days before there were breakout rooms in MS Teams, so all of the interactions came through me. And I was left with this kind of overall impression of, yeah, just kind of game over, it doesn't work. Having adjusted, and certainly the introduction of breakout rooms really helped, I found that I was able to kind of do a little bit more. But when we were looking to come back to face-to-face teaching this semester, I felt a little bit uncertain. Not for myself. I was really looking forward to being back in the classroom. It was the longest period of time that I've spent out of a classroom in 20 years, and it feels really weird. But mainly from the perspective of my students. A lot of them were very worried. A lot of them were very concerned. They didn't know what to expect with the current situation. There's this kind of sense of, well, you know, is it safe or is it sensible to go back into the classroom? And so I was looking around for different ways in which I could maybe try to alleviate that stress and that worry, and also to see how I could combine these two previously kind of very different spheres of the online and the in-class. And for me, the most obvious answer was HyFlex. Now, I mentioned HyFlex just a little bit earlier to those of you who were in the first meeting. HyFlex combines hybrid education, so where you're present in the classroom, if you're feeling okay, or you can join the classroom online through something like MS Teams, or you can work asynchronously. So you do an assignment or you do some work outside of the classroom, which matches and mirrors what's going on in the classroom at the same time. Yep. So you have three different modes in which you can participate in a course. The flex bit is that rather than it being decided in an arbitrary way, as it was in my children's school, instead you give the choice and the agency to the students. So they choose how they participate. And again, it's not just a choice that you make at the beginning of the semester when you don't know necessarily what the next week will bring, but it's a choice you make every single time you have a class. So you could start by attending a class in person. If the following week you perhaps didn't feel very well, or perhaps you'd had a close contact, or you didn't feel particularly safe, you could join the class online. And so you could join synchronously at the same time. If you were sick, you could take the asynchronous option. And so you're able to switch between those modes depending on your feeling of safety, security, and health. So it seemed great. It seemed pretty much exactly what I was looking for. But then I started trying to think, I mean, how do you combine, this kind of situation where we're in a classroom together, whilst at the same time we've got other people online? How does that even work? Am I going to have to teach two different lessons? Am I going to have to teach, one group You know, do I use one hand to teach one group of students and the other to teach the other? So very quickly in September, I kind of found myself back in this same situation of, well, I don't really see how it works. I don't really see how this is going to be possible. It is, and it definitely works. And the key I found to understanding how to make this work was actually informed by a methodology which is known as Jigsaw, which was developed by Aronson in the 1960s. Now, Aronson was faced with a problem that he was teaching classes which had recently been desegregated in the US. So whereas previously African-American children had gone to one school and white children had gone to another, he was then faced with a situation where he was teaching mixed groups of African-American and white children who didn't necessarily know how to work together because of the situation at the time. They'd been taught in exclusion, they'd been separated from each other. And so he was looking for a way in which he could get students to work together with one another. And he found that the way to do that was by jigsawing the content. So instead of giving all of the students all of the content that they had in class, sorry, I just lost my presentation for a second there. Instead of giving them all of the content at the same time, he would give one group some content, another group other content, and a third group another content, and then they would have to work together in order to understand the bigger picture. And so it occurred to me that, well, we could do that with the online and the offline classrooms as well. So if we were to jigsaw the content, so in terms of giving students who are in the class some things, some information, some of the students who are online and synchronously other information, and other students who are joining asynchronously a different set of information, that would make them work together. Now, in order to get the bigger picture, like we have here, they would have to share, compare, and kind of synthesize the information that each group, each very distinctive mode, had at their disposal. And then I thought, well, we could also go a little bit further. We can, you know, we want to try and get people to work together. So what if we were to jigsaw the interactions? So instead of just the students in class working together and just the students who are online working together and just the asynchronous ones, what if we try to encourage more interaction between these different modes of groups? Because then instead of splitting it into this kind of online, offline worlds, we combine the two. We make a bigger classroom, essentially. So how does that actually work? Let me just kind of take you through some of the ways in which we can kind of integrate and join content, and how we can also manage these different interactions. So first of all, in terms of jigsawing content, I think first and foremost, you need to shift that content outside of the classroom. So those of us who are familiar with the flipped classroom model is essentially you give students the work to do outside of the classroom, and then when they come to class, you activate that content, you do things with it. So rather than it being teacher-centered and kind of lecturing and everything being kind of delivered by the teacher in class, students do a lot more work outside of the classroom, and then we kind of get to grips with activating that content in the classroom. So that seemed obvious to me that the first thing that we'd have to do is we'd have to shift all of the content outside of the classroom, because then the students who are offline, so the ones who are coming face to face, and those joining with the other two methods of synchronous and asynchronous would be doing the same things. I mean, in order for my courses to achieve the competencies that are set out in the syllabi, they would have to have that same content. They would have to have access to the same kind of experiences. So that was the first step, was to basically move a lot of the kind of content-based instruction outside of the classroom. I did this by using MS Teams, by doing assignments. So each week before a class, the students would have the same assignment to do, regardless of how they were participating. And then there would be a follow-up option for those who hadn't been in class and who'd opted for the asynchronous option, which would consolidate that content. Okay. So again, it seemed quite straightforward, because instead of planning 3 different lessons, you essentially plan one. I'm always kind of, when I'm working on Delta and Delta courses, I say that I want to train teachers who are lazy. Because if we're lazy, that means that we've got more time to do other things. So by using these assignments, I was able to get students to prepare different things before the class. And then when they came to class, they were able to share those in their different bits of information and to put together everything into a kind of a bigger picture. Now that's just level one. So we kind of take the content, we kind of shift that outside the classroom, we jigsaw it. In terms of jigsawing interactions, this is where it gets really interesting, for me at least, because this was the thing that I struggled with the most when first coming to grips with HyFlex was, well, how do we get students who are in class to work with students who are online at the same time? So I mean, one thing that really helped was Aronson in terms of desegregating classrooms by forcing students to work together in different modes. So, I mean, I think the basic one that you can do is that you can get students who are online to all work together, and so you can put them in breakout rooms. They can work with different partners in different groups in different kind of formations online. And then in class, you can do the same thing. So you can get students working in pairs and small groups in class. But that just doesn't seem, it didn't seem right, because then it felt like I was kind of segregating the classroom again. I was kind of splitting students up. So what I found really helps is actually when you get, you kind of plan interactions so students who are online work with those who are in class. Now, given the fact that, you know, most students have mobile devices now, and they typically have headphones, it was relatively easy to set up breakout rooms whereby someone who was in class was actually paired up with a student who was online, equally with group work. It obviously depended on the number of students participating in the different modes. If it's relatively even, then that's probably the best way to go. If there's only a couple of people online, then I found that something that was quite useful and something that helped was simply taking a computer or taking a mobile device and pairing that online person up with someone who was in class. Yep. So by making these kind of mixed online and in-class groups, I found that we had a lot more fruitful interactions. It contributed to the sense that the whole class was one space, and it also really helped in terms of building bonds within the classroom. This then led to another issue, which was, well, okay, so online at the same time and offline in class, that's fine, we can integrate those. But what about those people who are asynchronous? You know, we don't want those to be left behind either. So one way I found of kind of integrating those who were doing the asynchronous option was to get the students who were attending live to discuss the posts or to discuss the contributions that had been made by the asynchronous students and to respond. So this then had the kind of effect of getting everyone together and sharing certain ideas and participating. This means that you end up with a kind of a teaching mode which is resilient. Students are able to kind of pick and choose how they want to participate, and by jigsawing the content and the interactions, it brings those three different modes together. For me, I think it's been successful. It's been an interesting learning experience. Oftentimes I've had to kind of think on my feet and to kind of think, well, okay, how am I going to manage, you know, these particular sets of interactions? That's something I like about teaching. You know, if teaching was always the same every single day, I doubt very much that I would have been a teacher for the last 20 years. I think the experimentation, the fact that things go wrong, I think is not necessarily a bad thing, so long as you learn from those experiences. I found that it's really helped in terms of engagement. Students have been those who've been online have been a lot more engaged in what they've been doing. And that's regardless of whether they've opted for the synchronous or the asynchronous option. But most importantly, it's created a resilient classroom. And I'm going to kind of go I'm going to start talking now, I think, a little bit about the some of the kind of reflections that I've had after a semester of using HyFlex, and some tips for those of you who might want to perhaps consider using it going forward. Unlike Slater in this thing, I wouldn't say that it's straight A's. There have been things which have worked. There have been things that I would reconsider in the future. But overall, it's been a very positive experience. Perhaps the first thing is that it's not as overwhelming as it seems. As I said, it might seem quite challenging to kind of take on teaching students who are in the class and students who are online at the same time and kind of juggling all of this. It's really not. I think for me, what helped was kind of seeing in the first couple of sessions, we only had a few people who joined online and most people were still in class. So it was relatively easy to kind of, by using, my laptop or an individual student's phone connected to Teams, to get them to talk to people who are online, so they felt part of the class. And having done that, I think that then helped me realize that, well, okay, it's not an issue in terms of if there are more people online, you just change some of the interactions and some of the pairings that we do. Perhaps crucially, I mentioned earlier that it's kept online students more engaged. And one of the ways that that's been reflected is that almost always they've had their cameras on. Now, I'm sure most of us can remember last year when everything was online, this extremely dispiriting experience whereby we end up staring into an abyss of blank screens, for most of our lessons. Because students have been switching between the different modes, they've come to realize, I think, quite how important it is to have their videos on when they can. There's also been the thing which is because they're working with other people in the class, they don't want their peers to have this experience of staring into the abyss. They don't necessarily care about us, that's our job. But because they've also, they've kind of seen what it's like if you're talking to just an icon or, a set of initials on the screen, they've been more willing to turn on their cameras out of solidarity with their peers in the classroom. So I think it's been more engaging if they've been taking part online, and I think one of the ways that's been reflected is with the use of video. Another crucial thing, and this for me is perhaps the most important going forward, and why I think I would probably consider using HyFlex when things go back to normal. So when we don't necessarily have the kind of conditions that we have today. I think I would probably consider using HyFlex anyway. Now, the reason for that is because, for me, there's always been an issue with, well, what if a student misses a particular lesson, or what if they get sick and they miss 3 or 4 lessons? Technically, there's a certain number of absences that you're allowed to have, but if you have a medical note, then that excuses you from that, so then that's okay. But then that shifts the onus onto the instructor to give students extra work to make up for things that they've missed. If we start from the position of HyFlex, so there's already an asynchronous option, we don't need to worry about then at the end of the semester finding or making materials to make up for 5 different sessions. Students can still take part, regardless of how they're feeling and what their health is like and things like this. So that's one quite important thing, that it means that there's no student left behind. We end up with this situation whereby everyone's able to keep up with the content, everyone's able to keep up with what's going on in class, regardless of how they're feeling. So this is perhaps another big advantage, and one of the ones I think going forward is why I would consider using HyFlex. The other is I think it also it gives students a sense of agency. In a time when a lot of us don't necessarily feel that we have any agency, we don't necessarily feel that we have much control over what we're doing at the moment. giving students the choice of how they participate has really, I think, given them a lot more, just a lot more power, to be honest, and a lot more security. You know, I would say, generally speaking, the rates of students who have taken part asynchronously is relatively low. And that's been generally when people have been sick, when they've not felt up to joining like online or offline. And wherever possible, the students have tried to come to class. Yeah. Even though, you know, an awful lot of my classes are 8 o'clock in the morning, you know, and there are much nicer places to be than, you know, in one of my classes at 8 o'clock in the morning. Students have, wherever possible, come to class. As numbers have gone up, more students have shifted online because they feel safer, because, you know, they have different things that they're necessarily concerned about. But wherever possible, students do still prefer coming to class. Lastly, kind of my final point, because I'm aware that we should really also have some time for some discussion and some questions. In planning HyFlex, it's been for me quite important is to keep it as simple as possible. Given the already quite complex nature of the different ways in which you can take part, I found that if you kind of plan sessions which are perhaps more straightforward than you would do in a traditional classroom kind of format, that is more fruitful. Students are going to be there, they're going to be willing to participate in these 3 different modes, and if we keep it simple, then it leads to very fruitful and engaging interactions. I'm sure we have lots of questions. I'm sure some people might not be particularly convinced about HyFlex. I would love to have a conversation. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have, and yeah, look forward to discussing them.
Okay, thank you very much, Aeddan. I feel like there's an echo in my voice. I hope that you don't hear it. First of all, we sincerely apologize for the technical difficulties that came about. Those of you who have joined us and who joined us later, please be aware that the session is being recorded, was recorded, and now we're going to actually stop the recording.